If they pull back this curtain, the king may never hear what I know. Emily Carter pressed herself against the cold stone wall behind the crimson velvet and tried to make her breathing disappear. The palace ballroom was less than 2 feet beyond the fabric, bright with chandeliers, polished marble, and hundreds of people who had no idea that a frightened Omega servant was hiding only inches away. Through the narrow gap near the curtain's edge, Emily saw black shoes crossing the floor. One pair stopped, then another. "Search the western side," Lord Marcus Whitmore said. His voice was calm enough to make her stomach tighten. She cannot have gone far. Emily closed her fingers around the silver signet ring hidden in her skirt pocket, its engraved edges pressed into her palm. Less than an hour ago, she had known nothing about secret council meetings, Wolfsbane silver, or why a ring bearing the Blackwood crest had been concealed beside a glass vial. Now Marcus was searching for her, and Emily understood one thing with terrible clarity. Whatever she had overheard was important enough that he could not allow her to reach the Alpha King. A guard moved closer. "Who exactly are we looking for, my lord?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "A young servant. Brown hair, gray dress." Emily looked down at her sleeve. Gray. The uniform had always helped her disappear among the palace staff. Tonight it made her identifiable. She heard fabric move several feet away. The guards were checking the curtains one by one. Emily counted the sounds without meaning to. One curtain. Footsteps. Another curtain. Footsteps. Closer. Her wolf stirred uneasily beneath her fear, urging her to move, but there was nowhere to go. Behind her was stone. Beyond the curtain was Marcus. The nearest servant's passage was across the ballroom. She had spent 3 years at Blackthorn Palace learning when to lower her eyes, when to step aside, and how to pass through rooms filled with powerful people without being remembered. Being invisible had protected her before. Now invisibility had become a trap. "Check that one," Marcus said. The footsteps stopped directly outside her hiding place. Emily held her breath. Through the thin opening, she saw a guard raise his hand toward the velvet. His fingers were inches away. Then the ballroom doors opened. The change was immediate. Conversations softened. Servants stopped moving. Even Marcus turned. A new set of footsteps crossed the marble floor. Slow, controlled, unhurried. Emily knew that rhythm. Everyone in Blackthorn did. King Alexander Blackwood entered the ballroom wearing black formal attire edged with restrained silver, his dark hair neatly set back from a face that rarely betrayed emotion. He did not look toward the guests. He looked toward the western curtains. Toward her. Emily's pulse stumbled. Marcus stepped forward. "Your Majesty." Alexander continued walking. "Lord Whitmore, forgive the disturbance. We are handling a minor security concern." Alexander's silver-gray eyes moved briefly toward the guards. "A security concern that requires searching my ballroom?" Marcus remained composed. "A servant may have removed restricted property from the council wing." Emily's fingers tightened around the ring. Alexander stopped several yards away. "What property?" A pause. "Small, but noticeable." "We are still confirming that." Alexander's gaze returned to the curtain. Emily felt suddenly certain that he could hear her heartbeat through the velvet. The guard beside her reached again for the fabric. Alexander moved. He crossed the remaining distance and stopped directly in front of Emily's hiding place, placing his body between her and the guard. "Your Majesty?" the guard asked. Alexander gave him one look. The man lowered his hand. Emily stared at the king's silhouette through the curtain. He was close enough that she could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. Then his hand came to rest lightly against the velvet near her shoulder. He did not pull it aside. He did not expose her. Instead, he shifted half a step closer, completely blocking the narrow gap through which anyone might have seen her. Emily's wolf went strangely still, not calmer, still, as though something inside her recognized what her mind could not yet understand. Alexander tilted his head barely an inch. When he spoke, his voice was so low that the words belonged only to the woman hidden behind him. "Do not make a sound." Emily froze. Marcus approached from behind him. "Your Majesty, have you seen the servant?" Alexander did not answer immediately. His hand remained against the curtain. Emily waited in the darkness, holding the royal ring in one trembling fist, while the most powerful alpha in the kingdom stood between her and the man searching for her. 6 hours earlier, Emily had believed King Alexander Blackwood did not even know her name. She had been wrong. 6 hours earlier, Emily Carter had been standing beneath the same crystal chandeliers with a folded linen cloth in her hands and absolutely no reason to believe the night would become dangerous. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the western windows of Blackthorn Palace, laying long bars of gold across the marble floor while servants prepared the ballroom for the royal reception. Emily moved quietly between tables, straightening silverware, replacing water glasses, and adjusting white roses until every setting looked untouched by human hands. She had become good at that kind of work, good enough that most nobles never noticed who had prepared the room they admired. That glass is crooked. Lady Victoria Ashford stood behind her in an ivory evening gown, accompanied by two young noble women. Emily checked the glass. It was aligned perfectly with the plate. Still, she adjusted it half an inch. Of course, my lady. Victoria watched her for a moment. You are the Omega from the lower household staff, are you not? Emily kept her eyes respectfully lowered. Yes, my lady. I thought so. One of Victoria's companions smiled. You remember palace servants? Only unusual ones. Victoria reached toward the table and lifted a crystal glass filled with dark red wine. The palace has become very generous about where it allows people to work. Emily felt several nearby servants become quieter. Nobody looked directly at her. They knew the safest response to a noblewoman's cruelty was pretending not to hear it. Emily knew that rule too. Is there anything else you need, my lady? Victoria tilted the glass slightly. Wine spilled across the white tablecloth and ran over Emily's sleeve. A few drops reached the marble floor. Apparently, I need someone more careful. Emily looked at the stains spreading across the gray fabric. Heat climbed into her face, but she kept her voice even. I will replace the cloth immediately. One of the women behind Victoria gave a soft laugh. Emily bent to collect the wet linen. Her wolf stirred with wounded pride, but she pushed the feeling down. Pride did not pay for a room in the servants' wing. Pride did not protect an Omega without family or rank. 3 years at Blackthorn had taught her that dignity sometimes meant refusing to let another person decide what lived inside you, even when you could not answer them aloud. She gathered the stained cloth and stood. That was when she saw him. King Alexander Blackwood had entered through the eastern doors with Daniel Brooks beside him. Alexander wore a black formal coat with silver detailing at the collar, and the room seemed to reorganize itself around his presence. Servants straightened. Nobles lowered their voices. Victoria's expression transformed into gracious composure. Emily's eyes met the king's for barely a second. He had seen the wine. She knew he had. His silver-gray gaze moved from her stained sleeve to Victoria's untouched glass, then back to Emily. For one foolish heartbeat, she expected him to say something. He did not. Daniel handed him a document. Alexander glanced down and continued toward the council entrance. Victoria smiled faintly after he passed. There. Even His Majesty understands the difference between an inconvenience and something worth noticing. Emily said nothing. She carried the ruined linen toward the service corridor, refusing to hurry until the ballroom doors closed behind her. Only then did she release the breath trapped in her chest. In the narrow hallway, she pressed the damp cloth against the laundry cart and stared at the red stain across her sleeve. She hated that Victoria's words had found the exact place that already hurt. Emily had spent years telling herself that being unnoticed was useful. Invisible servants heard things. Invisible servants avoided trouble. Invisible Omegas survived powerful rooms by never giving those rooms a reason to remember them. Still, some small part of her had wanted the king to speak. She felt foolish for it. Emily, Mrs. Harper, the senior housekeeper, approached carrying a stack of fresh linens. Her eyes dropped to the stained sleeve, but she asked no questions. I need these delivered to the West Council wing before the reception begins. Emily accepted the stack. I can take them. Use the service corridor. The council is meeting early, and they do not want household staff crossing the main hall. Emily almost laughed at the irony. Of course they did not. Important people preferred servants they could not see. She changed her stained sleeve covering, balanced the folded linens against her chest, and started toward the western passage. Behind her, the ballroom filled slowly with music and voices. Ahead, the corridor narrowed beneath old stone arches where afternoon light could barely reach. Emily did not know that 2 men were already waiting beyond the next set of doors. She did not know that one of them had brought a vial that should never have entered the palace. and she certainly did not know that King Alexander had stopped walking moments after she left the ballroom, looked back at the closed service door, and asked Daniel Brooks a question he had never asked about any palace servant before. "What is her name?" Alexander did not repeat the question. He did not need to. Daniel Brooks had served him long enough to recognize when a casual sentence was anything but casual. "Emily Carter," Daniel answered after checking the household roster. 22 years old. Omega. She has worked at Blackthorn for 3 years, mostly in banquet service and the West household corridors. Alexander stood beside one of the tall ballroom windows, watching the service door through which Emily had disappeared. "Family. None listed locally." Daniel lowered the roster. "May I ask why?" Alexander's expression gave him nothing. "No," Daniel almost smiled. "Of course." Alexander turned toward the council chamber, but something inside him remained fixed on the moment Emily had passed. For months, his wolf had been restless beneath his control, never enough for anyone else to notice, but constant enough that sleep came in fragments and crowded rooms felt louder than they should. Physicians had blamed exhaustion. Advisors had blamed responsibility. Alexander had accepted both explanations because neither required him to admit that sometimes his own instincts felt like a door rattling in a storm. Then Emily Carter had crossed the ballroom, with red wine staining her gray sleeve. For 3 seconds, everything inside him had gone quiet. Not weaker, not suppressed. Quiet. The sensation had been so unfamiliar that he had nearly called after her. He had stopped himself. A king did not summon a servant because his wolf behaved strangely when she walked past. "Your Majesty?" Daniel's voice brought him back. Alexander started toward the council wing. "Find out who assigned her to the ballroom." "The housekeeper, presumably." "Find out anyway." Daniel followed him through the corridor. "You are making this increasingly difficult to interpret as ordinary administrative curiosity." Alexander gave him a sideways glance. "Then stop interpreting." They reached the council doors just as Lord Marcus Whitmore emerged. Marcus was impeccably dressed as always, silver beginning to show at his temples, his manner measured and respectful. "Your Majesty, we were not expecting you for another 20 minutes. Then you have 20 fewer minutes to wait." Marcus smiled. "Naturally." Dr. Henry Caldwell appeared behind him carrying a narrow leather medical case. Alexander noticed it because Caldwell usually brought nothing to political meetings. "Doctor." Caldwell inclined his head. "Your Majesty, council business requires medical equipment now." Caldwell's fingers tightened briefly around the case handle. "Routine materials. I came directly from the infirmary." Marcus stepped smoothly into the silence. "We were discussing next month's health provisions for the northern settlements." Alexander looked from Marcus to Caldwell. Nothing about either man was openly wrong. Still, his wolf stirred again. Restless. Irritated. Alert. "We will discuss it inside," Alexander said. Marcus held the door open. Alexander entered, followed by Daniel. But before the door closed, he heard the faint roll of a laundry cart somewhere beyond the adjoining service passage. His wolf went still again. Alexander stopped. Marcus noticed. "Something wrong, Your Majesty?" Alexander listened. Soft footsteps passed behind the wall. A servant moving through a corridor no council member ever used. The calm lasted only a few seconds, then faded with the footsteps. "Nothing," Alexander said. He continued toward his chair. On the other side of that wall, Emily carried the clean linens through a narrow passage lit by brass sconces. She had changed the covering over her stained sleeve, but she could still smell the faint trace of wine beneath the soap. The West Council wing was quieter than the ballroom, almost unnaturally so. Thick rugs softened every footstep. Dark portraits watched from paneled walls. Emily reached the linen room, placed half the stack inside, then carried the remaining sheets toward the guest preparation closet. As she passed a closed pantry door, voices reached her from the adjoining room. She recognized Marcus immediately. The amount must be exact. Emily slowed. Caldwell answered in a low voice. "I understand." "Do you?" Marcus asked. "Because if the symptoms appear too early, people will ask questions." Emily stopped walking. Her first instinct was to continue. Private council conversations were not her concern. Then Caldwell said, "Wolfsbane silver is restricted for a reason." Emily's fingers tightened around the linen. Every werewolf knew the name. It was not something discussed casually inside a palace. Marcus's reply came softer. "By tomorrow, The council does not need a sick king. They need a king who appears unable to control himself. Emily's breath caught. The corridor suddenly felt colder. Caldwell said something she could not hear. Emily leaned barely an inch toward the door. The linen shifted against her arms. One folded sheet slipped from the stack and landed on the wooden floor. The sound was small. In the silence beyond the door, it might as well have been a bell. The conversation stopped. Emily stared at the fallen sheet. For 1 second, nothing moved. Then Marcus spoke from the other side of the door. "Someone is outside." Emily moved before fear could decide for her. She bent quickly, gathered the fallen sheet, and forced herself to continue down the corridor at the same measured pace she used every day. Running would announce guilt. Freezing would be worse. Behind her, a door opened. "You there?" Marcus's voice traveled through the hallway. Emily stopped. She counted 1 breath before turning. Marcus stood outside the pantry with Caldwell several feet behind him, the physician still carrying his narrow leather case. Emily lowered her gaze exactly as palace etiquette required. "My lord, what are you doing in this corridor?" "Delivering linens to the guest preparation rooms." She lifted the folded sheets slightly. Marcus studied her face. "How long have you been standing here?" Emily made herself look confused rather than frightened. "I just arrived from the linen room." Caldwell glanced toward Marcus. Emily noticed the movement but pretended not to. "Did you hear anything?" Marcus asked. The safest answer came immediately. "I heard voices, my lord. I assumed the council rooms were occupied." Marcus took 1 slow step closer. "Nothing else." Emily shook her head. "No, my lord." The lie felt enormous inside her chest, yet her voice remained small and ordinary. That was the advantage of being overlooked. People expected very little from someone they had already decided was unimportant. Marcus looked at her gray uniform, then at the linens. "Finish your work." "Yes, my lord." Emily turned away. She did not breathe normally until she reached the next corner. Even then, she refused to run. She delivered the remaining sheets, closed the preparation room cabinet, and stood alone for several seconds with both hands resting against the cool wooden doors. Wolfsbane silver. A king who appeared unable to control himself. By tomorrow, she could still hear every word. Her first thought was to tell Mrs. Harper. Her second was that Mrs. Harper would have no power against a senior royal advisor. Daniel Brooks might listen, but Emily had no idea where he was. The king himself felt impossible. 6 hours ago, Alexander had watched Victoria humiliate her and walked away. Why would he believe an Omega's servant accusing one of his most trusted advisors? Emily left the room and started toward the servant's stairs. She could return downstairs, change clothes, finish her shift, pretend she had heard nothing. The thought should have brought relief. It did not. Halfway to the stairs, she stopped. Her grandmother's voice returned from years earlier, quiet and practical as ever. Being powerless and choosing silence were not always the same thing. Emily closed her eyes. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered to herself. Then she turned around. The corridor was empty. Marcus and Caldwell had gone, and the pantry door stood partly open. Emily approached slowly. She told herself she only needed something concrete, something that would make the truth larger than her rank. Inside, shelves held crystal pitchers, folded napkins, sealed bottles, and silver serving trays. Nothing looked unusual. Then she noticed a small glass vial near the back of the counter. Clear liquid. Silver stopper. No label. Beside it lay a dark red fragment of sealing wax. Emily stared at it. Caldwell had mentioned Wolfsbane silver. She did not touch the vial. Instead, she leaned closer and noticed something beneath a folded cloth. A glint of metal. Emily lifted the cloth carefully. A heavy silver signet ring rested beneath it. The Blackwood crest was engraved across its face. Her pulse quickened. Members of the royal family carried personal variations of the crest, and this one was unfamiliar. Along the inner band were 2 tiny initials. N.B. Emily heard footsteps outside. She immediately replaced the cloth, but something stopped her. The ring was evidence. Perhaps better evidence than her word alone. She picked it up and slipped it into the hidden pocket of her skirt. The footsteps passed without stopping. Emily exhaled slowly. She left the pantry and headed toward the servants' corridor, this time moving faster. Behind her, another door opened. Marcus returned to the pantry less than a minute later. Caldwell followed him. "We should move everything before the reception begins," Caldwell said. Marcus reached for the cloth. His hand stopped. He lifted it. The space beneath was empty. Caldwell stared. What was there? Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked toward the open corridor through which Emily had disappeared. When he finally spoke, the calm had vanished from his voice. The Blackwood ring. Emily had barely reached the servants' staircase when the first bell sounded from the ballroom, announcing that the royal reception would begin within the hour. Normally, that bell meant hurry. Tonight, it sounded like a warning. She kept one hand near the hidden pocket of her skirt as she descended, feeling the weight of the silver ring against her hip. The initials inside it would not leave her thoughts. N.B. She knew the Blackwood family well enough to recognize Alexander's name, but she could not remember another royal whose initials matched. That uncertainty made the ring more frightening, not less. At the bottom of the stairs, Emily stepped into the household corridor and nearly collided with Mrs. Harper. "There you are," the housekeeper said. "The ballroom needs another set of napkins before the guests arrive." Emily opened her mouth. She wanted to tell her everything. Instead, she noticed two palace guards entering the corridor behind Mrs. Harper. They were speaking with another servant, asking who had recently been assigned to the West Council wing. Emily's heartbeat accelerated. Marcus already knew. "Emily," Mrs. Harper studied her. "Are you feeling well?" "I am fine." The words came automatically. "I will take the napkins." Mrs. Harper handed her a fresh stack. "Use the north stairs. The western passage has been temporarily restricted." That confirmed it. Emily thanked her and walked away without looking back. She needed Daniel Brooks. If she could reach the king's secretary, she could give him the ring and repeat exactly what she had heard. But the palace was changing around her. Guards appeared at intersections that were normally empty. Staff were quietly redirected away from the council wing. Nothing looked like an emergency to the arriving guests. Yet Emily could feel an invisible net tightening through Blackthorn. She entered a narrow service corridor and stopped when voices approached from ahead. "Lord Whitmore wants the servant identified before the reception begins." Emily recognized one of the guards. "What description?" "Young woman. Brown hair. Gray uniform. Assigned to linens." Emily turned before they reached the corner. There were dozens of young women with brown hair and gray uniforms, but far fewer assigned to linen service. Marcus did not need her name yet. He only needed time. Emily took the East Passage, carrying the napkins as though she were simply completing another task. Her wolf remained restless beneath her skin, warning her whenever footsteps came too close. At the ballroom service entrance, she found Daniel speaking with a steward. Relief rose in her chest. She moved toward him. "Mr. Brooks." Daniel looked up. Before Emily could say another word, Marcus entered through the opposite doorway. His eyes found her immediately. He did not call out. That frightened her more than if he had. He simply began walking toward Daniel. Emily understood. If Marcus reached them together, she would never know what explanation he might invent before she could speak privately. Daniel noticed her hesitation. "Miss Carter." Marcus was 20 feet away. Emily lowered her voice. "I need to speak with you about the West Council wing." Daniel's expression sharpened. Marcus was closer now. "Not here," Emily added. Daniel glanced past her and saw him. Something changed in his face. "Go to the ballroom," he said quietly. "His Majesty will be there shortly." Emily did not argue. She slipped through the service door and entered a room transformed from the quiet space she had prepared that afternoon. Hundreds of guests now filled the ballroom beneath golden chandeliers. Music drifted from the string ensemble. Silk gowns and black formal coats moved across the polished floor. Emily should have felt safer among so many people. Instead, she realized Marcus could accuse her publicly and have her removed before she ever reached Alexander. She searched the room. The king was not there. Behind her, the service door opened. Marcus entered. Emily moved. She crossed behind a row of floral arrangements, past two servers carrying silver trays, and headed toward the western side of the ballroom. She could hear Marcus asking someone a question behind her. She did not turn. The nearest exit was blocked by arriving guests. The servants' passage was too far away. Then Emily saw the crimson curtains hanging beside the tall western windows. Heavy velvet. Floor length. Enough space between fabric and stone for one person to disappear. Her feet carried her there before she could reconsider. She slipped behind the curtain and pressed herself against the cold wall. The ballroom became muffled. Emily reached into her pocket and wrapped her fingers around the Blackwood ring. Outside, Marcus's voice grew clearer. Search the western side. Her breath caught. Footsteps approached. One curtain was checked. Then another. Emily closed her eyes. She had spent 3 years surviving Blackthorn by being invisible. Now the secret in her hand had made invisibility impossible. A guard stopped directly outside. His hand reached toward the velvet. Then the ballroom doors opened, and every voice in the room softened. Emily heard the slow, controlled footsteps of the Alpha King crossing the marble floor. Alexander stopped directly in front of the crimson curtain, and Emily felt the entire ballroom narrow to the space between his back and her hiding place. "Your Majesty, have you seen the servant?" Marcus asked. Alexander remained silent for one measured second. His hand rested lightly against the velvet near Emily's shoulder. "You have interrupted a royal reception to search for someone whose name you apparently do not know," he said. Marcus kept his voice respectful. "Restricted property is missing from the council wing." "Then secure the council wing." Alexander turned slightly, forcing Marcus to remain several feet away from the curtain. "Do not search my guests and household staff without presenting the matter to me first." The guards immediately stepped back. Marcus did not. "The servant may still have the property, and when you identify what is missing, you may explain why it was left somewhere a servant could supposedly take it." Emily heard the shift in Marcus's breathing. Alexander had not accused him of anything, yet the question landed exactly where it needed to. "Of course, Your Majesty." Marcus finally withdrew. "I will prepare a full report." "Do that." Alexander waited until Marcus's footsteps disappeared into the crowd. Then he addressed the nearest guard. "Clear this side of the ballroom. Quietly. Tell the guests there is a problem with the western windows." Within minutes, servants redirected people toward the center of the room. Music continued. Conversations gradually returned. Emily remained perfectly still until Alexander spoke beneath the noise. "You can come out now." She hesitated. Emily, hearing her name from him, startled her more than everything else. She slowly pushed aside the curtain. Alexander stood alone beside the window. Daniel approached from across the ballroom and positioned himself several yards away, giving them privacy without leaving them unprotected. Emily looked at the king. "You know my name?" "Yes." There were 100 questions in her mind, but only one mattered. "Why did you help me?" Alexander studied her face. "Because Daniel told me you tried to reach him immediately before Whitmore began searching for you." Emily glanced toward Daniel. He gave a small nod. "And because," Alexander continued, "you looked frightened of being found, not guilty of stealing something." Emily reached into her skirt pocket. "I did take something." Alexander's expression sharpened. She opened her hand. The silver ring lay across her palm. For the first time since she had seen him, the Alpha King lost his perfect stillness. His eyes fixed on the crest. "Where did you get that?" "The West Council pantry." He did not touch it immediately. "Who else saw you with it?" "No one. I think Lord Whitmore knows it is missing." Alexander finally lifted the ring from her palm. He turned it once beneath the chandelier light, then looked inside the band. Emily watched his face change. Not dramatically. Alexander seemed incapable of dramatic reactions. But the color left his expression, and his thumb stopped over the engraved initials. "NB," Emily said quietly. His gaze rose to hers. "You read them?" "Yes." Alexander closed his fingers around the ring. "Tell me everything." Emily did. She described delivering the linens, hearing Marcus and Caldwell, the words Wolfsbane silver, the exact amount, the warning about symptoms appearing too early, and the sentence about making the council believe the king could not control himself. She told him about the unlabeled vial and the red sealing wax. Alexander interrupted only once. "Did you touch the vial?" "No, good." When she finished, Daniel had moved closer. His normally composed face was grave. "Your Majesty, if her account is accurate, this is more than an attempt to embarrass the crown." "I know." Alexander looked again at the ring. Emily gathered enough courage to ask, "Whose is it?" Silence followed. Around them, the reception continued as if nothing had changed. Glasses chimed. Music drifted beneath the chandeliers. Victoria laughed somewhere across the room. Alexander seemed separated from all of it. "My brothers," he finally said. Emily blinked. She knew Alexander had once had an older brother, but palace history treated Prince Nathan Blackwood like a closed chapter. "Prince Nathan?" Alexander nodded. "He disappeared 11 years ago." Daniel stared at the ring. "That was never recovered." No. Alexander turned the crest toward the light. A thin trace of dark red wax remained inside one engraved groove. Nathan was wearing this the last night I saw him. Emily felt the meaning settle slowly. The ring had not merely been hidden beside a suspicious vial. Someone had placed an object belonging to a missing prince inside a pantry used by the men discussing a plan against the king. Alexander looked toward the far side of the ballroom, where Marcus stood speaking pleasantly with two council members. His face became unreadable again. Daniel, no arrests. No questions. Not yet. Daniel understood immediately. You want them to believe she never reached us. Exactly. Emily looked at Alexander. What happens to me? His silver-gray eyes returned to her, and once again both their wolves became strangely quiet. Until I know who inside this palace can be trusted, he said. You stay where I can protect you. Then he closed his hand around his brother's ring. Because whatever Marcus is hiding did not begin tonight. Emily had imagined royal protection would feel safe. Instead, it felt like standing beneath a spotlight. Less than 10 minutes after Alexander gave the order, Daniel escorted her from the ballroom through a private corridor normally reserved for members of the royal household. No guards announced what was happening. No servants were told why an Omega from banquet service had suddenly disappeared from her station. That secrecy should have reassured her, but Emily could not stop thinking about Marcus standing among the guests, smiling as though nothing had happened. Where are we going? She asked. The king's private library, Daniel said. Only 4 people have unrestricted access. Let me guess. Lord Whitmore is one of them. Daniel glanced at her. Not anymore. They reached a dark oak door 2 floors above the ballroom. Alexander arrived moments later, still carrying Nathan's ring. Once inside, he locked the door and crossed to an old cabinet filled with royal records. Emily remained near the fireplace while Daniel drew the curtains. The room smelled of cedar, paper, and faint wood smoke. Alexander placed the ring beneath a brass lamp. Nathan was 25 when he disappeared, he said. I was 21. Emily heard something different in his voice now. Not the Alpha King speaking about palace history. A younger brother remembering the last night he had seen someone he loved. What happened? Alexander turned the ring slowly between his fingers. The official account said Nathan left Blackthorn after an argument with the council. His carriage was found abandoned nearly 40 miles north of the palace. There was no confirmed sighting after that. And you believed he died? Emily asked carefully. Eventually. Alexander's eyes remained on the ring. I believed many things because people I trusted gave me reasons to believe them. Daniel opened a ledger on the desk. Marcus joined the senior council shortly before Prince Nathan disappeared. Emily looked at him. Was Dr. Caldwell here then? Daniel searched another page. He entered royal service the following year. Alexander's expression hardened. Find every appointment Marcus recommended during that period. Archives, household administration, transportation, medical staff. Everything. Daniel nodded. Emily studied the ring. The red wax matters. Both men looked at her. Why? Alexander asked. The pantry uses ordinary gold sealing wax for supply inventories. Red wax is used in the restricted archives. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. How do you know that? Servants replace candles and writing supplies. Emily hesitated. People talk around us because they assume we are not listening. Alexander held her gaze for a moment. That assumption appears increasingly expensive. A soft knock interrupted them. Daniel opened the door only after Alexander gave permission. Mrs. Harper stood outside, holding a folded gray uniform. Her eyes found Emily immediately. His Majesty requested a temporary reassignment. Emily stared at Alexander. Reassignment. Starting tonight, you will assist within the royal household, he said. It gives you a legitimate reason to remain near protected rooms. Emily understood the strategy, but discomfort tightened inside her. Everyone will notice. Yes. Then Marcus will know you spoke to me. Alexander shook his head. Marcus already knows something went wrong. I would rather control what he believes happened next. Daniel understood first. He will assume His Majesty noticed Emily during the reception and reassigned her for unrelated reasons. Emily almost laughed. That seems unlikely. Daniel's mouth twitched. You would be surprised what people believe when the alternative is admitting they have lost control of a situation. Mrs. Harper handed Emily the uniform and quietly wished her luck before leaving. 30 minutes later, Emily entered a smaller reception room, carrying a tray of water for the king and 6 council members. Her new uniform differed only slightly from the old one, but the silver household insignia at her collar attracted immediate attention. Victoria Ashford noticed first. Her gaze moved from Emily to Alexander. "How unexpectedly fortunate," Victoria said. "Yesterday she was arranging tablecloths. Tonight she serves the king personally." Emily placed the first glass on the table. "Temporary assignment, my lady." "Of course." Victoria's smile sharpened. "Some people rise remarkably quickly once they are noticed." Heat touched Emily's face, but before she could answer, Alexander spoke from the head of the table. "Miss Carter is here because I trust her." The room went silent. Emily looked up. Alexander was not looking at Victoria. He was looking at Marcus. For one brief second, Marcus's pleasant expression became completely blank. Then it returned. "An admirable quality," he said. "Trust." Emily continued around the table. When she reached Alexander, Dr. Caldwell stood unexpectedly and reached for the crystal pitcher. "Allow me." Emily hesitated. Caldwell smiled politely. "His Majesty has had a long evening." He poured the water himself and placed the glass near Alexander's hand. Emily noticed his fingers remain on the rim for half a second too long. Nothing more. No powder. No strange color. No obvious reason to object. Still, her wolf stirred. Alexander reached toward the glass. Emily's eyes met his. She gave the smallest shake of her head. His hand stopped. Marcus saw it. And across the table, Caldwell did too. Alexander's hand remained suspended above the glass for only a second before he drew it back. "I have had enough water." Caldwell's smile tightened. "Of course, Your Majesty." Emily lowered her eyes and continued around the table, but she could feel Marcus watching her. The council discussion resumed with reports from the northern settlements, transportation budgets, and winter supply schedules. To anyone entering the room, nothing seemed unusual. Emily knew better. Caldwell had insisted on pouring the king's water himself, and both he and Marcus had noticed her warning. She kept her expression neutral until the meeting ended nearly 40 minutes later. The council members departed one by one. Victoria lingered near the doorway, casting Emily a final unreadable glance before leaving. Marcus stopped beside Alexander. "You seem unusually cautious tonight." Alexander closed the document before him. "A king who survives long enough usually is." Marcus smiled. "Then Blackthorn is fortunate." "We shall see." Marcus bowed and left with Caldwell. The moment the door closed, Daniel crossed the room and lifted Alexander's untouched glass using a clean cloth. "I will have this secured." Emily looked at the pitcher. "Take that too." Alexander nodded. "And every glass Caldwell handled." Daniel collected them carefully and left through the private door. Emily finally released the breath she had been holding. "They know I warned you." "They know you reacted to something," Alexander said. "That is not the same thing. Marcus will assume I told you." "Perhaps." Alexander stood. "Which means he will either retreat or make a mistake." Emily looked toward the closed door. "You sound as though you expect the second." Marcus has spent years being the smartest man in every room. Men who believe that eventually become careless. Alexander walked toward the window. Moonlight silvered the dark garden below. "You noticed Caldwell before I did. I was watching his hands." "Why?" Emily almost answered because servants always watch hands. But the truth was more complicated. Because powerful people usually control their words better than their movements. Alexander turned toward her. Something almost like approval touched his expression. "Remember that." Daniel returned 20 minutes later with a sealed envelope rather than laboratory results. "This was delivered to the royal household desk 5 minutes ago." No messenger identified himself. He handed it to Alexander. There was no royal seal, only Emily's name written across the front. Her stomach tightened. "Mine." Alexander did not open it. He offered it to her. "Your choice." Emily broke the plain wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream paper. 6 words had been written in dark ink. "Nathan Blackwood is alive. West Wing." Emily read them again. Daniel stepped closer. "That is impossible." Alexander took the page after she handed it to him. His face became still. "Apparently someone wants us to question what is possible." Daniel examined the envelope. "It could be a trap." "It probably is," Alexander said. Emily barely heard them. Something about the paper felt familiar. She lifted the envelope again and brought it closer. A faint scent clung to the fibers. Clean linen. Dust. Lavender. Her thoughts moved backward through 3 years of palace work. I know where this came from. Both men looked at her. The Old West guest wing, Emily said. The linen closets there are lined with lavender sachets. They have been for years because the rooms are rarely used. Daniel took the envelope and smelled it. Lavender exists throughout the palace. Not like this. Emily rubbed the torn edge between her fingers. Look at the paper. There are tiny cotton fibers in it. The stationery stored in the West guest wing is old handmade stock. I have carried it out during inventory. Alexander's gaze sharpened. Who would know you could recognize that? Emily considered the question. Someone who knows how servants work. Daniel looked toward the dark corridor outside. Or someone who has been watching her. Alexander folded the message and slipped it inside his coat. No one else hears about this. What about Marcus? Emily asked. Especially Marcus. Alexander moved toward the private door. Daniel blocked him with a look. You are not going into an abandoned wing because an anonymous note mentions your missing brother. Correct. Alexander opened the door. The three of us are going. Emily followed them through silent corridors toward the oldest section of Blackthorn. The West guest wing had been closed for nearly 7 years. Dust covered the furniture beneath white sheets, and moonlight entered through narrow windows. Emily led them past 3 unused bedrooms to the linen room. The lavender scent grew stronger. She moved an old cabinet aside and stopped. Behind it, a narrow wooden panel stood open by several inches. Daniel stared into the darkness beyond. Was that passage always there? Emily shook her head. It was sealed. Alexander lifted a lantern from the wall. A thin line disturbed the dust on the floor, as though the panel had been opened recently. He looked at Emily. Stay behind me. She almost obeyed automatically. Then she remembered the ring, the vial, and every person who had expected her to stay where she was placed. I know these service routes better than you do. Alexander studied her for a moment, then handed her a second lantern. Beside me, then. Together they stepped into the hidden passage. After roughly 200 feet, the tunnel divided. Emily raised her lantern. On the stone floor near the right-hand passage lay a fresh lavender sprig. Someone had left it there deliberately. And farther ahead, beyond the darkness, a door quietly closed. The sound of the closing door seemed impossibly loud in the narrow passage. Alexander raised one hand, and all 3 of them stopped. Emily held her lantern close, watching its warm light tremble across damp stone walls. The fresh lavender sprig remained near her feet, too carefully placed to be accidental. Someone had expected them to come this way. Daniel lowered his voice. We should bring the guards. Alexander looked toward the darkness. If this passage has remained hidden from the palace for years, I am not announcing that we found it until I know who uses it. Emily studied the floor. A thin track disturbed the dust along the right passage. Someone has been moving things through here. Alexander followed her gaze. How can you tell? The dust is heavier near the walls. The center has been cleared repeatedly. She moved her lantern farther forward. And there are wheel marks. Daniel crouched without touching them. A narrow cart. Emily nodded. The kind used for linens or kitchen supplies. They followed the marks for another 100 feet until the passage opened into a small storage chamber. Several wooden crates stood against one wall. An old writing desk occupied another. Emily immediately recognized the Royal Infirmary seal stamped onto 2 crates. Daniel noticed it too. Do not open anything. Alexander approached the desk. A lavender sachet rested beside a stack of thick cream stationery. Emily touched only the corner of the top sheet. Cotton fibers showed along its edge. This is the paper from the message. Alexander scanned the room. Then whoever sent it wanted us here. Daniel pointed toward a small wax warmer. Dark red residue remained inside the metal dish. Emily's attention shifted to the signet ring in Alexander's hand. The color matched the wax caught inside its engraving. The ring was used here. Alexander's jaw tightened. On the desk lay several folded documents, but he did not touch them. Daniel, bring 2 trusted archive officers here after we leave. Everything is documented before it moves. A faint sound came from beyond the chamber. Not footsteps. A wooden latch. Emily turned toward a second passage almost hidden behind the crates. Cool air drifted through it carrying the scent of wet leaves. That leads outside, she whispered. Alexander lifted his lantern. Or somewhere with garden access. They followed the draft. The corridor narrowed until they reached a wooden door with a thin line of light beneath it. Alexander stopped directly before it. Emily could hear someone breathing on the other side. Her wolf stirred, but strangely, she did not sense immediate danger. Alexander reached toward the handle. Before he touched it, the door opened. A tall man stood beyond it wearing a plain charcoal coat. He looked somewhere in his mid-30s, with dark hair touched lightly by gray near the temples and silver-gray eyes so similar to Alexander's that Emily understood before anyone spoke. Alexander became completely motionless. Daniel whispered, "Impossible." The stranger looked first at Alexander, then at Emily. His expression softened when he saw the lavender sprig still caught against the hem of her dress. "Good," he said. "You understood the trail." Alexander's lantern remained perfectly steady, but Emily saw his free hand tighten at his side. "Nathan." The stranger gave a small, tired smile. "Hello, little brother." 11 years seemed to pass across Alexander's face without changing it. He stepped forward once, then stopped as though he no longer trusted the evidence of his own eyes. "Where have you been?" Nathan's smile disappeared, trying to find proof strong enough to survive Marcus Whitmore. Alexander stared at him. "For 11 years? Not inside Blackthorn." Nathan opened the door wider, revealing a forgotten garden room filled with maps, ledgers, and sealed document cases. "After I disappeared, I spent years following payments and witnesses beyond the kingdom's central territories. I returned to Blackthorn only recently, when I had enough original records that Marcus could not erase the truth by destroying one archive." Daniel looked toward the documents. "Why not contact the king directly?" "I tried before I left. Letters vanished. Messengers were redirected. By the time Alexander inherited the crown, Marcus had people inside nearly every official communication route." Nathan looked at Emily. The service routes were different. People like Marcus rarely pay attention to servants until servants become inconvenient. Emily thought of the note. "You knew I would recognize the paper. I hoped you would. I learned an Omega servant had taken my ring from Whitmore's pantry. Then I heard the king had suddenly moved that same servant into the royal household." Alexander's expression cooled. "You have been watching us." "I have been watching Marcus." Nathan crossed to a map marked with small circles around palace supply rooms. "That includes the royal infirmary route." Emily immediately thought of Caldwell. Nathan pointed toward a narrow line beneath the council wing. "This passage runs behind the medical storage corridor. Earlier tonight, Caldwell removed a restricted vial and carried it toward the council rooms. Later, I saw him return without it." Alexander glanced at Emily. "The glass." She nodded. Nathan's eyes moved between them. "You stopped him from drinking it?" "Yes," Emily said. "Then Marcus failed tonight." Nathan's expression remained grave. "But he will not stop. The plan is larger than one glass of water." Alexander stepped toward the maps. "What plan?" Nathan looked at his brother for a long moment before answering. "Marcus does not need to defeat the Alpha King. He only needs the council to believe the Alpha King can no longer control himself." He opened an old ledger and placed one finger beside a faded legal notation. "Then they invoke the Regency provision." Daniel went still. Emily looked at Alexander. "And who controls the Regency?" Nathan's eyes hardened. "The man who spent 11 years making certain every road to the throne eventually passed through him." Nathan turned the ledger toward Alexander and traced a faded paragraph near the bottom of the page. "The Regency provision was written for a ruler who becomes temporarily incapable of governing. Marcus does not need the crown permanently. He needs enough council votes to remove your authority while claiming he is protecting it." Alexander read the passage without touching the book. "Marcus cannot appoint himself regent. He does not intend to." Nathan opened another folder. "He has spent years placing loyal officials around families the council considers respectable. He needs a public figure they will accept while he controls everything behind that person." Emily thought immediately of Victoria Ashford, of her confidence around the court and the way Marcus had spoken with her family during formal receptions. "Lady Ashford?" Nathan looked at her. "Possibly. I have no evidence that she understands the full plan. Ambition makes people useful without making them conspirators." Alexander's expression remained unreadable. "And Caldwell? Useful for a different reason." Nathan pointed to several copied infirmary records. "Restricted compounds have been transferred in small quantities for months under legitimate medical codes. Nothing large enough to attract attention." Nothing unusual enough to trigger an audit. Daniel studied the pages. Wolfsbane silver. Nathan nodded. Controlled amounts can disturb a wolf's senses. Restlessness. Confusion. Difficulty separating instinct from judgment. Marcus only needs witnesses to see the Alpha King appear unstable during the right meeting. Emily remembered Alexander reaching for the glass. But he did not drink it. Not tonight, Nathan said. That does not mean tonight was the first attempt. The room became very quiet. Alexander looked at Caldwell's supply records again. My wolf has been restless for months. Nathan's eyes lifted sharply. How long? Long enough that I stopped counting. Emily felt cold despite the lantern beside her. Could they have been giving it to him in smaller amounts? Possibly, Nathan said. But we do not assume anything until the infirmary records and his meals are examined. Alexander looked almost irritated by his own uncertainty. I have had physicians telling me it was exhaustion. Physicians appointed through whose recommendations? Nathan asked. Alexander did not answer. Emily watched his hand settle against the edge of the table. His fingers tightened. At first she thought he was angry. Then his focus shifted strangely, as though the room had moved half an inch without warning. Alexander, Nathan said. The king straightened. I am fine. Emily knew immediately that he was not. His breathing remained controlled, but something had changed in the pressure of his presence. His wolf felt restless beneath the surface, not threatening, only confused. Daniel stepped closer. Your Majesty, sit down. No, Alexander closed his eyes briefly. Everyone stay where you are. Nathan obeyed. Daniel did too. Emily remained still for one heartbeat, then remembered every moment since the ballroom. Each time she had come near him, something inside both of them had quieted. Emily, Alexander said without opening his eyes. Do not come closer. She should have listened. Instead, she took one careful step. His eyes opened. Silver gray met blue gray. I said stay back. His voice was low, but there was no anger in it. Only effort. Emily stopped within arm's reach. Your wolf became quiet when I walked past you this afternoon. Alexander stared at her. How do you know that? Because mine did too. Nathan's attention sharpened. Emily slowly raised one hand. May I? Alexander could have refused. He did not. Emily rested her palm lightly against his cheek. Nothing flashed. Nothing changed in the room. No mysterious force moved through the air. Alexander simply exhaled. The tension in his shoulders eased. His breathing slowed. The restless pressure Emily had sensed faded until his wolf became completely still. Her own answered with the same impossible calm. Alexander looked at her as though the silence itself had become a question. What did you do? Nothing. Emily started to lower her hand, but he gently covered it with his own for a single moment before releasing her. Then why did it stop? Nathan stepped away from the documents. His expression had changed from concern to recognition. Because Wolfsbane can confuse instinct, he said. It cannot create recognition where none exists. Alexander looked toward him. Recognition? Nathan ignored the question for a moment. Tell me exactly what happened the first time Emily entered the same room as you. Alexander hesitated. My wolf went quiet. And every time she came near afterward, Alexander's eyes returned to Emily. The same. Emily's heartbeat quickened. What does that mean? Nathan looked between them, and for the first time since revealing himself, something almost gentle appeared in his face. It means Marcus may have spent months trying to make Alexander distrust his own wolf. He paused. And tonight, that wolf finally found the one presence it does not question. Alexander became very still. Emily barely breathed. Nathan gave the truth its simplest name. His wolf recognizes you. Emily heard Nathan's words, but for several seconds they seemed to belong to someone else's life. She was still standing in an abandoned garden room beneath the oldest wing of Blackthorn Palace, wearing a servant's gray uniform with a silver household insignia at her collar, while the Alpha King watched her as though the entire world had shifted beneath his feet. Recognizes me as what? She asked. Nathan did not answer immediately. Alexander did. Do not let anyone decide that for you. Emily looked at him. His voice had changed. The strain from moments earlier was gone, yet there was something more vulnerable in its place. My wolf recognizing you does not give me a claim over you, he continued. Whatever this means, you choose what it becomes. Emily had spent years around alphas who treated rank like permission. She had expected certainty from a king, perhaps even command. Instead, Alexander gave her space. That affected her more deeply than any declaration could have. Nathan closed the ledger. There will be time to understand the bond later. Right now, Marcus believes his plan is still alive. Daniel checked his watch. The emergency council session begins at 9 tomorrow morning. Nathan nodded. That is where he intends to invoke the Regency provision. Alexander turned toward the evidence covering the table. Then we let him. Emily stared at him. You want Marcus to make the accusation? I want him to make every accusation. Alexander's calm had returned. If I confront him tonight, he denies everything and his allies disappear into the palace. Tomorrow he must identify himself publicly. Daniel understood. We secure the records before dawn. We test the water Caldwell poured. We verify the infirmary transfers. Then we allow Marcus to present his case. And Nathan? Emily asked. Alexander looked at his brother. 11 years of unanswered questions stood between them, but there was no time to resolve them now. Nathan remains hidden until Marcus commits himself. Nathan gave a faint smile. You always did learn quickly. You had 11 years to practice being irritating. For the first time, Emily saw something almost ordinary between the brothers. Nathan's smile warmed. I missed you too. Alexander looked away, but the corner of his mouth moved slightly. The moment lasted only seconds. Then Daniel began organizing the documents they could safely remove. Emily helped sort records by date, recognizing supply codes and household markings that the others overlooked. One invoice caught her attention. Wait. She placed it beneath the lantern. The document listed ceremonial beverages delivered to the council chamber every month. The receiving signature belonged to a palace steward named Thomas Reed. Emily knew him. Thomas retired 2 years ago. Daniel checked the date. This was signed 3 weeks ago. Alexander leaned closer. Forgery. Not a very good one, Emily said. Thomas always signed his surname with a long downward stroke. I processed enough inventory sheets to remember it. Nathan searched through another stack and found 4 more documents bearing the same false signature. Daniel looked impressed. Marcus built his entire plan around people never noticing servants. Emily shook her head. Not only servants. Anyone he thought was beneath his attention. Alexander's gaze settled on her. That may be the mistake that ends him. Before dawn, 2 trusted archive officers quietly secured the hidden chamber. The suspicious glass from the council room was transferred to an independent laboratory outside Caldwell's authority. Nathan moved to a protected suite known only to Alexander and Daniel. Emily expected to return to the servants' wing. Instead, Alexander walked with her through the silent eastern gallery as pale morning light began touching the windows. Neither spoke until they reached the staircase. You should sleep, he said. Emily almost smiled. That sounds remarkably optimistic. I am told kings are allowed optimism occasionally. She looked at him. Without the council around him, without Marcus watching, Alexander seemed younger than the distant ruler she had observed for years. Are you afraid of tomorrow? She asked. He considered pretending otherwise. She saw the decision in his eyes. Yes. The admission surprised her. Not of Marcus. Of discovering how many people I trusted while my brother was trying to reach me. Emily understood that kind of wound. Betrayal did not merely change how you saw another person. It made you question your own judgment. Then do not face tomorrow alone. Alexander became still. Emily realized how bold the words sounded coming from her. She almost withdrew them. He spared her the need. Stand beside me at the council. As a servant? No, his eyes held hers. As the woman who saw what everyone else ignored. Emily's wolf settled into that strange, profound quiet again. Alexander did not reach for her. He simply waited. For once, the choice belonged entirely to her. Emily lifted her chin. Then I will be there. Morning light crossed the floor between them, and somewhere below, the palace bells began announcing a new day. Neither of them knew exactly what their bond meant yet. But when Alexander turned toward the council chamber, Emily walked beside him instead of behind. By 9 o'clock, every chair in the royal council chamber was occupied except the one beside Alexander. Emily stood there instead. She could feel the confusion moving through the room without anyone daring to voice it. Yesterday, most of these people would have passed her in a hallway without remembering her face. This morning, the Omega servant stood at the Alpha King's right side while Daniel Brooks arranged sealed documents across the long oak table. Marcus entered last. His eyes found Emily, then Alexander. and finally the empty water glass placed inside a clear evidence case near Daniel's hand. He understood immediately that something had changed. Still, he smiled. "Your Majesty, I requested this emergency session because recent events have raised serious concerns regarding the stability of the crown." Alexander leaned back calmly, then raised them. Marcus had expected resistance. Emily saw it in the brief pause before he continued. "Several council members have witnessed unusual behavior in recent months. Irritability, withdrawal, instability in your wolf. Last night, you disrupted a royal reception over a household servant and refused medical assistance offered by Dr. Caldwell." Caldwell sat 3 seats away, his face pale but controlled. Marcus placed an old legal document on the table. The Regency provision exists precisely for circumstances in which an Alpha King may temporarily lack the clarity required to govern. Murmurs spread around the chamber. Alexander did not interrupt them. Marcus looked almost relieved. "I therefore request a formal council evaluation." "Granted," Alexander said. Silence fell. Marcus blinked. "Your Majesty? You asked for an evaluation. You have one." Alexander looked toward Daniel. "Begin with the medical evidence." Daniel opened the first sealed report. At 6:30 this morning, an independent laboratory completed an examination of the water poured for His Majesty last night. The sample contained a restricted compound consistent with Wolfsbane silver. Caldwell stood abruptly. "That is impossible." Daniel looked at him. The laboratory repeated the test. The glass could have been contaminated afterward. Emily spoke before fear could silence her. "I watched you pour it." Every face turned toward her. Caldwell's expression tightened. "A servant's interpretation is hardly evidence." Emily met his gaze. "No, but the sealed glass, the independent test, and the infirmary records are." Daniel placed several documents on the table. For months, restricted materials were removed from royal medical storage using falsified authorizations. Marcus's composure began to fracture. "And we are accepting documents presented by whom?" "By me." The voice came from the chamber entrance. Alexander did not turn. He had known exactly when Nathan would arrive. Everyone else froze. Prince Nathan Blackwood stepped through the open doors wearing a simple dark suit, his silver-gray eyes moving across a room that had believed him gone for 11 years. One councilwoman rose slowly from her chair. "Prince Nathan." Marcus went completely white. Nathan walked to the table and placed his signet ring beside the Regency provision. "You should have destroyed this when you had the chance, Marcus." Marcus stared at the ring. "This is absurd. Anyone could claim to be a missing prince." Nathan gave him a tired smile. "Then perhaps you should not have preserved 11 years of correspondence bearing your own seal." Daniel produced the recovered ledgers, payment records, forged transportation orders, and archive transfers. Nathan explained each document without raising his voice. He described intercepted letters, redirected messengers, false reports surrounding his disappearance, and the network of officials Marcus had quietly positioned throughout the palace. Marcus attempted to interrupt twice. Alexander allowed him to speak. Each denial only gave Daniel another record to place before the council. Finally, Marcus turned toward Emily. "And all of this supposedly began because we trust the word of an Omega servant who admits she removed royal property from a restricted room?" Emily felt the old instinct telling her to lower her eyes. She did not. "No," she said. "It began because you assumed nobody would listen to me." Marcus opened his mouth. Emily continued. "You spoke freely because you thought servants were invisible. You left records where household staff worked because you believed we did not understand them. You forged the signature of a retired steward because you never bothered learning how he signed his own name. You hid a prince's ring beneath a linen cloth because you thought the people who handled linen did not matter." Nobody laughed. Nobody looked away. Marcus stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. Alexander rose. "Emily Carter did not create the evidence against you. She noticed what your arrogance taught you to ignore." He turned to the council. "The evidence will be reviewed under royal law. Until that review is complete, Lord Whitmore and Dr. Caldwell are suspended from all council and palace authority." 2 senior guards stepped forward. There was no struggle. Marcus simply stood there, suddenly smaller without the obedience his title had once commanded. As he was escorted from the chamber, Victoria Ashford appeared near the open doorway. Her eyes moved from Marcus to Emily. The confidence she had worn the previous evening was gone. Emily expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt strangely calm. She no longer needed Victoria's embarrassment to restore anything that had been taken from her. Alexander waited until the doors closed. Then, before the entire council, he moved the empty chair beside him away from the table. "Miss Carter." Emily looked at him. "Yes, Your Majesty?" His expression softened. "You stood beside me when doing so could have cost you everything." Emily remembered the curtain, the ring, the hidden passage, and the moment she had chosen not to walk away. It was the right thing to do. Alexander nodded once. Then Blackthorn owes its future to someone who did the right thing when everyone powerful around her found reasons not to. This time, when the council looked at Emily, no one looked through her. By sunset, Blackthorn Palace no longer felt like the place Emily had entered 3 years earlier. Nothing about the stone walls had changed. The chandeliers still burned above polished marble. Servants still crossed the corridors carrying folded linens and silver trays, and guards still stood beside the great doors with the same disciplined silence. Yet when Emily walked through the western gallery, people noticed her. Some bowed their heads. Others simply stepped aside. She found that stranger than being ignored. The council had spent the afternoon securing records and appointing independent officials to review everything connected to Marcus and Caldwell. Nathan remained at the palace under Alexander's protection, though word of his return had already traveled through Blackthorn faster than anyone could contain it. Emily had expected the day to end with questions. Instead, Alexander asked her to meet him in the ballroom after the last council session. She arrived to find the enormous room nearly empty. Evening light poured through the western windows, turning the crimson curtains deep red. Emily stopped when she recognized the exact place where she had hidden the night before. Alexander stood beside that curtain, Nathan's silver ring resting in his palm. "Strange place to choose for a conversation," she said. His expression softened. "I thought you might appreciate the difference. Yesterday, I was hiding behind it. Today, nobody is searching for you." Emily walked closer. "That is definitely an improvement." Alexander looked toward the quiet ballroom. The independent physicians believe the Wolfsbane exposure happened gradually through several ordinary treatments Caldwell prescribed over recent months. They expect the effects to fade completely. Relief loosened something inside Emily. "Your wolf, quieter already." His eyes met hers. Although that may not be entirely medical, Emily felt her own wolf settle and answer. Nathan's explanation still frightened her because it carried possibilities larger than anything she had allowed herself to imagine. Alexander seemed to understand. He did not move closer. "I meant what I said this morning. Recognition is not ownership. A bond is not an order. You owe me nothing because my wolf recognized yours." Emily looked at the man before her and remembered how easily he could have spoken differently. He was the Alpha King. Entire councils changed course when he entered a room. Yet with her, he was waiting for permission to hope. "What if my wolf recognized yours too?" she asked. Alexander's breath caught almost imperceptibly. "Then I would ask what you want." Emily glanced at the curtain. "Yesterday, I wanted to survive long enough for someone to believe me." She looked back at him. "Today I think I want to discover who I am when I am not trying to disappear." Alexander nodded. "Then do that." "And you?" "I would like to know you while you do." No command. No grand promise. Just an invitation. Emily smiled. "That sounds reasonable." Alexander offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment before placing hers in his. The contact was simple, warm, and quiet. Their wolves settled together, not with thunder or spectacle, but with the unmistakable peace of something finally finding where it belonged. Footsteps approached from the gallery. Nathan entered carrying 2 folders and stopped when he saw them. "Should I return later?" Alexander released Emily's hand, though not quickly enough to hide anything. "Yes." Nathan smiled. "Excellent. I waited 11 years to annoy you again. I intend to use every opportunity." Emily laughed, and even Alexander surrendered a small smile. Nathan disappeared back through the doors. Emily looked around the ballroom one final time. She remembered Victoria's spilled wine, Marcus's searching guards, and the cold stone behind the curtain. None of those memories vanished simply because justice had finally arrived. They became something else instead. Proof that the woman who had once survived by being unseen had stepped forward when being seen mattered most. Alexander lifted Nathan's ring toward the evening light. "My brother came home because you noticed what others ignored." Emily shook her head. He came home because he never stopped searching for the truth. And I kept my crown because you refused to abandon it. Emily met his eyes. Then perhaps we both learned something. What? She glanced toward the open ballroom doors, where servants, council members, and guards moved through the palace beyond. Power can make people obey you. Her fingers tightened gently around his hand. But trust is why they choose to stand beside you. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. Then together they walked away from the crimson curtain, side by side, into the golden evening light. Thank you for watching this story with us. If Emily's courage and Alexander's choice to trust her meant something to you, tell us in the comments what moment stayed with you most. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel and help us bring you more stories about courage, dignity, justice, and the kind of love that never asks someone to become smaller in order to belong.